Well, how about I'll just start really quickly by saying welcome back. Welcome back to the virtual land of the Change Leadership series. It was really nice to see you all in person last month, for those of you who were able to make it. And again, thanks to those of you who weren't there in person but are still committed and joined us virtually. We were really happy with I just felt like the energy in the room was so different being in person. I expect that you all probably felt that too, but it was just really nice, and we were really happy that Alison joined us for the first of the 3 sessions that she was going to be facilitating. And fortunately, we've already done introductions, so I'm not going to be redundant in that way. And what I'll do is turn it over to Alison and let her get started.
Right on. Thank you so much, Rob. And it's great to be with you all again. I'm sorry that I can't show you my little Hollywood square face. We're having weird weather here and my power has been intermittent today. And I thought if I have a choice between you being able to hear me and see me, hearing is definitely the way to go. So you guys are locking up a little bit here and there, but I can basically see your faces. So I will be looking through the conversation for unmutings of the digital variety, hand raisings of the actual variety and digital variety, and encourage you to use the chat as well. So I'm going to keep trying to monitor that along the way. It really was so cool to be with you in person, and I was excited about being together again. And I don't know if it was because it was such a tiny room and you're all doing such unbelievably difficult, important work, or what it was, but the time that we spent together has really stuck with me. And I'm just tremendously grateful to be back with you. And, took very seriously feedback from the session, and some of the feedback suggested, it'd be great for you all to have more time to work together in conversation. So I'm prioritizing some significant chunks of breakout time for digging in and you talking together and working together on your challenges. I did, and I think Rob shared it before. There is some content here that I do want to share with you today that's focused principally on emotional intelligence and the relationship between emotional intelligence and equity consciousness development and leadership skills. And so I do want to share some of that, but I will also say that I shared an additional set of things that Rob, I think, passed along that are just tools that are kind of for you. Here's something for you to think about and use. One of them is a leadership assessment, sort of self-assessment or group tool kind of thing. And one is a facilitator self-assessment tool that we use and that I use. I use both of them regularly, both internally, organizationally at Sova and with partners and institutions all over the country. For the moderator or the facilitator self-assessment, I try to do it on a quarterly basis for myself, just to remind myself that even though I've been facilitating professionally for more than 2 decades, that we all have strengths and weaknesses, that I have my own limitations as a facilitator that I need to try to manage against. So I think about all of this work, leadership development and leadership skill building work, as ongoing, truly practice-driven work. So it's like, any other thing, like lifting weights or yoga or practicing a musical instrument or a sport. It's about practice over time. And so I wanted to share some tools that we have found useful for practice over time, but also that you might use for yourself and with colleagues. Like last time, I am sharing some community agreements, not because you necessarily need those in order to have constructive conversations together in your small groups, but it's always a good reminder to keep these things in mind. And it is always a good reminder when you find yourself in situations where you are leading conversations with groups of faculty or others, to take the time to set up some community agreements at the outset against which people can sort of find some tools for creating more interaction safety and hard conversations, because a lot of the work that you're trying to do And I still have, I was just reviewing my notes from the last time being with you all, the kinds of projects that you're working on and the disciplines in which you're working are they are the sites of particularly emotionally charged change conversations. And so having these kinds of things can be really, really helpful. So, nothing necessarily to dig in on here, except I will say practicing equity-minded attunement to power dynamics is important everywhere, but it's one of the things that we need to practice in the minute in all of our conversations in order to make solid progress and to kind of enter and leave conversations the way that we want to. If there's anything that anybody wants to add, if there's anything that you've seen from your own work, group agreements, community agreements, ground rules, whatever you call them, that you think are particularly effective, feel free to throw them in the chat as well. Or if there's anything on this list that means something in particular to you that you want to emphasize or stress, feel free to put that in there as well. So again, this is both about our time together, but this is also about modeling the kinds of stuff that change leaders do when they are putting together meetings and conversations, particularly tricky ones. All right, so the keys for us today, the sort of core questions guiding today are, what are some keys to successfully facilitating difficult conversations? And I am thinking here about the conversations that you need to have with faculty in your work, but there may be other difficult conversations, silo spanning conversations, peer conversations, leadership conversations where you're working on kind of managing up to get support for your projects, that kind of thing. So however it goes, what are some of the keys to successfully facilitating challenging conversations? And what role does emotional intelligence play in developing change leadership skills? We also have this piece about how does EQ relate to equity-focused work? And because there was so much in our conversation last time about the challenges of leading the kind of work that you're trying to lead, your projects, in contexts where there is relatively uneven sort of equity consciousness development. Somebody, I think, put it in terms of uneven self-awareness of positionality in different settings, right? You have to think about the relationship between these things. And so what I want to do is just get you into conversation first instead of talking at you about things, and have you dig in together on a couple of key questions and then come back together for a kind of quick hit debrief. So one of the things that you're going to do in the breakout is both dig into questions, but also collectively take responsibility for coming back with a few ideas to share with the group that can help anchor the next piece. And then I will share a little bit more about how it is that, and I'll just speak for me here, although I think it is true for my colleagues at Sova. I think it's particularly true for me because of the kind of work that I do with institutions, why it is that EQ is the place that I keep coming back to as a site of particular skill building, why it's so important, why it is absolutely and directly related to the kind of change leadership skills that everybody wants to develop to achieve the kinds of things that you want to for your students through your projects and through your overall work. And then we'll have another breakout. I snuck in a bio break there. You can figure out how to cram that in on the side. I know that having breaks is a good thing, and I deprived you of breaks last time. And when we're all trapped in a room together, it's easier to prevent you from attending to your, sort of human self. But why not create some space to let you stand up, stretch, and sort of get away for a minute and then come back. So that second breakout is also 30 minutes, but it's going to be, it'll be a couple of minutes to yourself. And then large group debrief, and to whatever extent there is time left, I'm going to share the tools, I'll share the things, I'll share a couple of other ideas with you. But as always, I think I did this before, I will give you my email address as well, in case you want to keep in touch or you have particular questions. Okay, so with that, here we go, into the breakout. These are the questions. So what are the hardest conversations that you have to facilitate for your project to be successful? What makes them hard? And as you dig into this conversation, if any of you have ever done a 5 whys exercise, it's essentially asking why 5 times to get deeper into the core or root of the challenge that you're unpacking. So what are the hardest conversations that you need to facilitate? Why is that hard? Why is that hard? Why is that right? So you dig deeper using the question why, and you get to some really interesting stuff by the 5th why. And then, to the extent that you also have seen strategies work for managing those kinds of conversations, those particular kinds of difficulties, share some of that. But this is about unpacking what makes really difficult conversations really difficult in the work that you're trying to achieve, the projects that you're trying to advance.
Of incentivizing change and innovation, that like a lot of faculty would like to make changes but don't have the bandwidth or the time or the support to do it.
Yeah, that's really helpful. One clarifying question there, and then feel free, anybody else who wants to dive in on the chat or raise a virtual or otherwise hand to get in here. I do have a question about, the kind of relationship between bureaucratic red tape and the mindset shifts. It sounded like you were starting to connect those dots. And I was actually just thinking about a session yesterday, sort of focus group, confidential conversation with folks leading gateway course redesign work at universities, talking about how hard it is, for example, for chairs to be change leaders because of the not just the amount that's on their plates to begin with, and many of you know this because some of you are chairs yourselves, but the amount that's on their plates that are sort of the procedural bureaucratic components of the job, but also the way that resistance to change can show up as triggers of further bureaucratic nightmares, right? And so how do you sort of the way that bureaucracy is weaponized as a form of resistance to change? Was that sort of an undercurrent in what you were talking about, Corey, or were they sort of separate things, bureaucratic red tape and mindset shift stuff?
I think we started to put them together. I don't know if we quite got to the like weaponizing bureaucracy to make change harder. We didn't touch upon that, but we did kind of talk about like each of us had different experiences with like dealing with bureaucracy and dealing with people that didn't have the right mindset for the change we want to make. And sometimes those happened together, that in the bureaucracy process, you'd run into someone without the mindset you need.
Yep, for sure. What else? What other themes showed up in conversation? We're gonna, this won't be as robust a conversation as it should be, both because it's virtual and time bound, but would love to hear a little bit more about other themes that appeared. Yeah, please, Jules.
It pins very closely to what was just discussed, so I'll throw it in there that I guess I'll start by saying that maybe before the conversation I was expecting that maybe we would have been talking more about changing mindset related to the pedagogical things we're trying to accomplish, and instead I definitely found we were definitely talking more about bureaucratic aspects and like those challenging conversations with even just trying to translate the purpose of what we're trying to do to somebody who literally just needs to push something from one place to the next, which not to diminish how difficult that can be for somebody, or that process might be difficult, or how stretched thin everybody in these roles are right now, but just trying to navigate everything and trying to translate everything. And we had some great advice in the room about gathering those people together and reminding them of why, and like asking those people how we can support each other, instead of like when we're not getting any response, or when we're not getting any information, or when we're feeling like we've CC'd every single dean that we could possibly CC to make something move. That was some very sage advice we got in the room.
Yeah, I like that a lot. Sort of coming as a what can we do to support our ability to move this forward, rather than why aren't you answering my emails? Start doing the thing I need you to do. And instead, how can I help you? Help me, help our students. Yeah, Brian.
Yeah, one kind of recurring theme in our discussion was the fact that oftentimes faculty members come with sort of, they have kind of a barrier of, like Paul gave an example of, if you know the agenda to a meeting before you come into the meeting, you kind of develop your ideas about the talking points ahead of time. And so you already kind of have your ideas made up, and it doesn't necessarily allow for a decent conversation to happen because you kind of already came into the meeting with certain assumptions.
Yeah.
And he mentioned the idea of, if you just have hallway conversations where the agenda is not set ahead of time, that you can possibly have a bit more of a genuine back and forth, because it's not two people with their minds made up kind of talking past each other. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Also,
yeah.
Corona brought up the idea that for junior faculty members or faculty members who are lower in the sort of totem pole, so to speak, it can be hard to convince people to change or to consider changing because of that sort of power dynamic. And again, it's just another one of those barriers where because of the relationship between faculty members, there's barriers that have to be sort of worked around. And so that was kind of a recurring theme, just the barriers that we all bring into the conversation.
Yeah, no, it's really helpful. And I think that caution about the limitations that junior faculty face as they try to create change, there's, both resistance to that because of hierarchy and power dynamics. There's also, we've heard lots of examples of real punitive, dangers of, career harm by virtue of, not towing whatever line is viewed as the right one for senior faculty and departments. So even where you have institutional leadership, president and provost saying, we believe in equity, we believe in X, Y, and Z, we want to do these things, when it comes down to what decisions are made about promotion and tenure, it is often not, there's often a disconnect there. So there's challenges both in sort of will building for junior faculty, but also sort of navigating professionally the dynamics there. So it's really, really important. Anything else that anybody else wants to dive in on here? Mindset has been used as kind of shorthand in a couple of ways. And I know we talked about mindset in the last session, and that really is why this focus on EQ is here, because it's about sort of protecting your own resilience and ability to sort of hold on to your own fire and passion for the work while also supporting it in others. But is there anything about mindset that anybody else wants to add, or any other particular topic? Yeah, Jill, please.
Hi there, sorry. Yeah, we definitely touched upon mindset, and in particular, more of a fixed mindset that we see in STEM faculty. And more broadly, kind of, I picked up on different characteristics of white supremacy culture amongst our different difficult conversations that we had. I heard one, Jeremy, talk about people not wanting to step on other people's toes, which is kind of a hierarchical power kind of situation, fear of speaking up. So fear of confrontation is a characteristic of white supremacy. And the need for quantity and objectivity in STEM as opposed to qualitative data and relationships and focusing on social aspects and identity. That was something that's touched upon in my project and also in Teresa's project, and how it's difficult to get people on board in STEM because of that. And then also Tammy talked about a dynamic with a woman of color in her group, and this unfortunate issue of perfectionism that is conditioned in the system, and trying to address that, which I think a lot of us have that perfectionist bug as well. But it's about a lot of conditioning, I think, is kind of threaded through, and the hierarchy that exists within higher education.
Yeah, it's a lot of really important points in there. And I saw that you got Some shout outs there. So thank you as well, Tammy, for seconding that. Okay. Anything else? Anybody, any burning desire to dive in on anything? Otherwise, I'm going to share with you a little bit more about EQ and why it's just a place that I feel like we have inevitably turned in work supporting institutions, and particularly work that touches on faculty engagement for folks. All right, let me share this screen. Okay. So there are lots of stuff out there about emotional intelligence. I will say that my favorite of all is the Bradbury and Graves emotional intelligence work. It's very practical. It's very, and by practical, I mean sort of in the literal sense of the word, it's about practicing skill building in EQ. And so that's where I kind of key a lot of my own work on EQ for myself and for team members, as well as for institutional folks. And so the kind of the bottom line is that the human brain, like, we get information, we feel it before we make sense of it. And the reason that this is so important is all of you are probably acutely aware, because of the kinds of projects that you're doing, that threat responses to change work are extremely common. And the forms that threat responses take for faculty are quite varied. There are patterns and they're predictable, but they're also quite varied. They can show up in all kinds of ways. And so when you think about what it is that, and I mentioned last time the importance of not getting hung up on the fundamental attribution error, which is sort of, these are what these people are like, but instead, these are the conditions that are eliciting the responses from folks. There is something here that is valuable to understand as you think about your own work as change leaders from wherever you are. So emotional intelligence is for you, for your colleagues, for everybody. And it's true that you don't have any control over anybody but yourself. So that's why I focus a lot on sort of personal skill building and development in this work, with the hope that it also creates the conditions for people to influence peers and colleagues and others. EQ is the bedrock skill set for other critical skills for change leadership. So all of these things here, right? Communication, social interaction, empathy, trust building, stress management, presentation skills, being able to be collegial in a meeting, right? Team building, all of these things are actually related to and have at their core emotional intelligence components. And the fact is that we feel before we think through things. And so which was probably very helpful to us as animals trying to survive, in the woods, right? But if we are trying to figure out how to make things work together, the fact that we feel things before we think them through can be a real barrier to collaborative problem solving. So the thing that is, I think, most important as we're thinking about leadership skill building and leadership development is that EQ skills absolutely can be built and improved. They are not, it is true that some people, by virtue of who you are, or your upbringing, or whatever it is, you might be more naturally inclined to be emotionally intelligent. But the fact is that everybody can build and improve their own emotional intelligence skills, and that practice is in fact the key. And so it is something that is in your hands in some really critical ways. It is about, the idea of really deeply ingrained patterns that came up just now, sort of deeply ingrained ways of being and thinking. It's really well timed as a concept, because EQ is about the work of creating new habits, recognizing and trying to actively break old habits in communication, sense making, and communication with others. The payoff of working on emotional intelligence is enormous. So for you personally, and I'll just talk about for me personally, being able to handle difficult situations in a manner that is more in keeping with how I want to be in the world is a tremendous benefit of work on EQ, rather than I get to have more sort of control over how I engage in conversations, how I engage even really difficult, emotionally charged conversations, if I am more aware of the elements of emotional intelligence and if I'm practicing some of those things. The payoff is also huge. So it's great sort of psychological benefit and practical benefit for you individually. But it also models for others the kinds of things that you want to see in your colleagues and peers. And so it's also something that's really helpful for, that a lot of these concepts can be applied more widely and can be shared with colleagues and teams as part of like, we're in this together. Let's all work on some of these things so that we can have the kind of working relationship we want to have, because we want good things for our students. The EQ does go hand in hand with equity consciousness development. I think it's one of, if I had a whole other life to pursue unpacking the relationship between emotional intelligence and equity consciousness development, I would love to do that. And I hope somebody or many somebodies are out there doing that work. But in the meantime, I'm going to just, since I don't have that extra life right now, want to think about that in settings like that, like this with you, right? So what does it mean to develop a clearer, stronger sense of one's own positionality, the relationship between historical origins of inequity that have been racialized along class lines, how we show up in these spaces personally, interpersonally, and institutionally, right? These are all related to emotional intelligence in various ways. Okay, so there are essentially 4 core skills. And again, I want to keep this at the level of skills because it is about upskilling for yourself and others. One is about you. It's all about you. And one set of those are all about you. Those are self-awareness and self-regulation. So self-awareness is your ability to accurately perceive your own emotions in the moment. So understanding why you're feeling the way you're feeling is self-awareness. And also understanding your tendencies across situations is part of this. It's essentially like a straightforward and honest understanding of what makes you tick and what pushes your buttons, right? Self-awareness is a foundational skill that makes all of the other skills easier to develop. And if you want to take a minute to think about one example of a human being that you know in your life who you would describe as lacking self-awareness, just for yourself, think about how you know that, how it shows up. What does it look like to engage with somebody that you feel like lacks self-awareness, right? So just think about that for a minute. It is, again, it's sort of the foundation from which the other things spring. And it's about staying on top of your typical reactions and spending some time really understanding them so that you can get to know yourself from the inside out and outside in. And then self-regulation, this is one of my particular growth areas, opportunity areas, is using your self-awareness to manage your emotional reactions to situations and people. I am extremely easy to read, which has plus sides and minuses for folks. I would love to be a person who is more in charge of what I show and don't show about how I feel, but it's ongoing work for me. But it's about building the kinds of skills to sort of stay flexible and to direct your, one's behavior positively. So the other 2, which are about how you are with other people. One is social awareness, and this is where the heart of EQ, of the relationship between emotional intelligence and equity comes into play here. So social awareness is about accurately reading other people's emotions and understanding them, even if you don't feel the same way, even if you don't have the same experience, even if you can't really identify, right? It's about still having an understanding and appreciation and a care for understanding where people are coming from. And so, building good habits, here is about listening, and breaking bad habits is the thing. I mean, it's like the point that was made about the people that are given the agenda in advance of the meeting so that they come already with their minds made up. Is that's a broader version of this other piece, right? Like the sharing, it's going by itself, sort of anticipating your next point rather than listening to be curious and really listening to understand. So social awareness is hard work, extremely important work, and something that, as you are able to develop it or pay attention to it, you can see the different ways that there's room to grow for everyone and what that growth does in terms of giving you more credibility, making it easier for you to be heard by colleagues and others, et cetera, right? And then relationship management is your ability to use awareness of your own emotions and others to actually manage interactions successfully. And the fact is that, you know, it's about building and cherishing really strong relationships, even with people you don't particularly like, because you have to solve problems together with people in lots of different settings. And the idea that you have to really, like or enjoy another human being in order to solve problems together is not true. So figuring out how to manage your relationships to achieve goals, common goals with colleagues, is an essential piece of the puzzle, and sort of one of the cornerstone skills of this kind of work. So there's a few first things first, and I want to share them here and then connect the dots to equity, and then give you some time to reflect and get back into conversation. So the never-ending work of self-awareness is, there are a few things just to keep in mind. And the thing that is important above all of this is that sort of the magic of EQ is that even thinking about self-awareness increases your self-awareness. And that is like, there's something just gorgeously merciful about that, because it is so hard to deal with human beings and it is so hard to be a person. And the idea that we actually can get stronger in our self-awareness by even just reflecting on it and thinking about it is, I find that very appealing and helpful. So, don't treat feelings as good or bad, right? Learn more about what your feelings are telling you, right? Yours particularly, but also as you're making sense of others, right? Really be curious about what feelings are telling you. Observe the effect of your emotions on yourself and other people. This is where, asking a safe person and saying, what is it like when I'm angry? Or what is it like when and really listening. It's very, very vulnerable making work, but it's extremely satisfying to get into some of that. And so, oops, no, it went away. Okay. And then sort of leaning into the discomfort that comes with actually taking an honest look at yourself is really important. It is not supposed to be easy to build self-awareness. It is humbling, and humbling is so important. Humility is really, really helpful for change leadership skills in every way, shape, and form in your work. And then really understanding more about like who and what pushes your buttons. It turns out, as I've thought about it over time and experienced it, I particularly despise being condescended to, and I react badly to it when it happens. And so, and never to my benefit, frankly, right? It never, and I've observed this in one of my children as well, that it is like just putting a little distance between the thought that comes into your mind and it coming out of your mouth when you're pissed about something like being condescended to is really, really helpful for managing your relationships, because you can damage relationships so quickly. And repairing relationships takes a lot of work. Now, we all have relationship repair work to do. So, you can't avoid that damaging. You just have to figure out how to navigate it, right? So know what pushes your buttons, know who pushes your buttons, really dig in and unpack what it tells you about yourself, right? And then this thing about watching yourself like a hawk is so helpful for those of us who struggle with things like anger. Like stepping outside of your emotions and saying, all right, what is going on here, right, for myself? And really getting a sense for that can be enormously helpful for putting some distance between you and what you're experiencing. That physical part of feelings, they show up as feelings before they show up as things that you think through. So like paying attention to the physical part of feelings can really help you see stuff coming and better manage yourself. Again, many of you may not have any of the problems of sort of self-regulation or sort of self-awareness, but the fact is that I think all of us have quite a lot of opportunity and work to do here. Getting to know yourself under stress, like what are your typical reactions? What does your stress look like to other people, right, is so important in this. So the more you consider these ideas, the more likely you're able to kind of navigate complexity with the things that you need to be an effective change agent from wherever you are. And those include focus, calm, and empathy, right? If you can bring those to more and more of your situations, it increases your maneuvering room essentially to bring others along. And so, you know, this idea of change, stage models of change, set the vision, build the team, do the quote, like all those steps, they are steps that are done by human beings through human interaction. And so these things really matter, right? Okay, so what's EQ got to do with it? And if I have put Tina Turner in anyone's head by saying what's something got to do with it, then I will consider this Friday a success. I almost put got to do with it twice in here, but I didn't. So, all right. So first things first, again, the never-ending work of self-awareness. Self-reflection on power, positionality, and privilege is really, really hard work. I can tell from the conversations that we had last time and the things that you've said here, that it's work that because you are engaged in the kinds of projects you are, you're doing it, right? But you're also observing the extent to which there is great unevenness among your colleagues in their ability and willingness to reflect, right, on power, positionality, privilege. And so the extent to which you are calm, focused, empathetic, and able to kind of pursue your own equity consciousness development while also supporting your colleagues, the more likely you are to kind of create the conditions for other people to reflect on their power and positionality and privilege. It is actually necessarily painful work. It is, I think I shared this with you last time and you all, and there was a lot of nodding and I heard a lot of stories and people told me stuff after that it is personal, interpersonal, organizational, and hard to sort of really unpack how our institution structures, systems, deeply held beliefs are, have worked at cross purposes with our commitment to equity, right? So it is everybody's work. I will say that it is particularly as a white person, I will say that it is particularly the work of white people who have been the primary beneficiaries of rigged systems to lead the way and do the work and have the hard conversations and show what it looks like to colleagues to do the work, right? And so really, really important. And again, it was one of the, so many of the conversations in the last session, I sort of was left with this feeling of the work that you all are doing, and that's on that score and how hard it is. Sorry, my deck wants to do things by itself, which is depressing. Okay. And then you all know this, it's maybe a little bit less so in the People's Republic of California, but everywhere that I work, the kind of toxic, hostile, politicized environment in which it's about blame and hostility and certitude and is really at cross purposes with the work of becoming humble and curious and cultivating the kind of care that is required to be successful in the work. So there is an environmental challenge here that is compounding and continuing to erode our ability to cultivate emotional intelligence and equity consciousness just at the moment when we need those skills more than ever, right? This is leadership development work. This is the work of being a leader, is understanding the relationship between origins of inequities, the work that you're doing, and what it means to walk your own journey and support others in walking theirs, right? And then again, I've said this before on the EQ side, the same is true on the equity front. It is work that is worth doing, and the personal and interpersonal and organizational payoffs are enormous. And they show up in ways we talked about a little bit last time. I think I shared some of the quotes from faculty talking about the joy of experimenting in collaboration on behalf of better and more equitable outcomes for students, and what it feels like to see new forms of kind of learning and possibility, right, for students. It's really a powerful experience. And so as people get into this work, the benefits are tremendous for folks. So I want to share these things with you. I know that it's not a super tight connection between the other, like the way that leadership is always talked about and the things that people are told about how to be a leader and what it means to lead. But I hope you can kind of see, based on our last conversations, the relationship between the challenges that you're facing in your projects And overall, your projects are examples of broader work and commitments and passion that you have for your students and what you're trying to accomplish. Kind of the relationships here between these kind of domains of emotional intelligence, equity consciousness raising, and your ability to lead. Okay, so I am this is breakout 2 that I'm worried it's going to go ahead without any without me doing anything. So I'm not going to touch anything here, but and we'll get these questions for you into your breakout as well. What have you learned about through your project or other projects about the keys to building a sense of enthusiasm and co-ownership among faculty, academic leadership, whoever you're like, the thing here is like enthusiasm and co-ownership, right, of the work. What are the things that you have seen or that you think or suspect to be essential to building that? Because that's the that's the stuff of sustained progress, right? Moving past a discrete project to ongoing gains is the kind of enthusiasm that people have for it, the optimism and appetite, right? What have you seen sap morale or shared will for progress? Or what are some of the things and themes that you see that in your work or as you have been involved in other projects where that's eroded? And then how do you protect yourself in this work? And this is really, really important. Sort of how do you protect your own sense of hope and efficacy and resilience and optimism for the work that you're trying to do when you face resistance to your work that is either grindingly bureaucratic and undermining, or openly hostile and offensive, or otherwise upsetting or beleaguering given how busy everybody is, right? Like, what are some of the things that you keep in mind or that you maybe practice that help you protect your own sense of hope and in the work? Okay, so that's what I would love for you to spend a little bit of time talking about in this next breakout. This is the same thing, talk about it, spend a minute. You don't have to spend 3 minutes or 2 minutes, you're now in your conversations, but spend a minute to think about this and then dive in and have good conversations, make lots of room for each other, and then we'll come back together. Okay, so I'm going to just share this with you. This is what I want to, if we can, talk a little bit about this for a bit. And you know what, actually, here's what I'm going to do so that we can talk the rest of the time. I'm just going to show you the rest, like what I had that I was going to show you. And then we're going to go back to this. I'm going to stop sharing and we'll just open it up for conversation. And I'll start to take notes. So if there's other stuff I can share after the conversation that would be helpful to you, I can do that. And this way we can proceed in this fashion. So what I wanted to, but while you're here, as you're back from your smaller groups, please do take a minute, if you don't have it, to jot a couple of notes about a theme or a takeaway, something that's like stuck with you in your breakout, and so that we can get as much conversation into a short period of time in a minute here. Okay. So I was going to share with you, because I talked about it last time, the anger iceberg. It is helpful at all stages in life. It is used particularly with children, interestingly, and with neuroatypical children and families, but it is also extraordinarily helpful for all humans in every way. So particularly in our culture and society and country. So these are like ideas for everybody that help you consolidate your gains as a change leader and help you navigate the complexities of dealing with other humans, because it is very difficult to be a human. Now, so whether you are somebody who has found yourself super angry in a meeting and to the point of it affecting your ability to be effective in the meeting as a leader, as a facilitator, as a colleague, or if you have been subjected to other people's anger in a meeting that felt, because when we're met with anger, our gut reaction is to respond with anger, or to flee, or to, right? But so I talked about this a little bit last time, but I just want to reintroduce it because it's an example of how if you're able to step outside of your own emotions, but also step outside of of the impact of other people's emotions on you as you're trying to lead complicated change work that is countercultural. Really thinking about the way that anger shows up versus the way that, sort of where anger comes from for yourself and for other people. So it is a lot easier to be empathetic and to lead calmly and to be focused and to stay connected to your task at hand and to create the conditions for hope and whatnot, if you are able to effectively manage and respond to anger as you feel it in yourself and as it comes from others. David, I see a hand. Let's hear it.
Yeah, I just have a question. If there's any significance to the words that are up near the top versus down near the bottom.
Oh, such a good question. No, this was just the best depiction that I saw of it. No, that is such a good question, though. No, but I do wonder if we had more time and we could do this like a real, like in a room and like really talk about and troubleshoot specific things on your projects. I wonder what would happen if we tried to sort them as, sort of level them, right? Like which ones do you think are the ones that are most commonly driving the expressions of anger that you see? Right? Or the expressions of anger that you feel, right, as you're trying to lead and model being a good change leader, because that is the singular challenge of leading, really, is modeling what you want to produce and see and make possible for others, right? So it's a really good question, David. But no, these were just this. I particularly liked this depiction of this. All right, so taking the time to unpack it, right? Asking questions. This idea, it is so much easier to think about than it is to do, but I will tell you that it is, once you start thinking about it, it's a lot easier to do. And that is not showing anger by accident, but sort of helping put some distance between yourself. There are a lot of things. I was in a meeting yesterday with somebody, again, it was a confidential conversation about Gateway course redesign, and this person was so understandably angry, and she said, really, like, to find myself again and again and again in conversations where I have to say, so we have to talk about whether or not racism is real. Is that really where we are? Like, I have to convince you that racism is a thing and that our institutions reflect it. And so somebody else in that conversation said, it was a man of color who leads work, Gateway course redesign work and sort of professional development for faculty. And he said, it's one thing to come into a conversation, to initiate a conversation with somebody that they don't want to have, that's going to be hard. And it's another thing to keep having to have that conversation again and again until there's shit, and the beleaguerment of that, particularly for change makers of color who are, sort of where there is continuous extra burden placed, right? For leading, for explaining, right? So there was a lot of really interesting conversation. I didn't actually have anything to say about the anger iceberg yesterday. In that conversation was really just listening about what makes it hard and what makes it easier and what chairs need and what people need, right, in terms of supports. But as you think about not showing anger by accident and how you manage and respond to other people's emotions as you're dealing with work, which is inevitably emotionally charged, particularly data conversations. So this is where I'm looking at you, Marco, because you're up next. This is my little shout out to Marco's session that's coming up next. When we get into the data conversations, right? I mean, the number of data people I have encountered who have said, I just thought it would be as easy as like actually showing people definitive data, and then we could have a conversation and we'd all be on the same page, and just the suffering that comes from the distance between that expectation and the reality of using data to make difficult equity grounded change and things like Gateway course redesign. So I'm excited. I'm hoping to actually come and listen and learn from Marco's session as well in this. So I just want to tee it up that when we get to the anger iceberg, data is a really important place. Okay, The only other things I'm going to say, and then I'm going to stop talking to you, is I said these things before. These are the things, right? The kind of fundamental mindset shifts that are the ongoing work. And so I just wanted to remind you of them here. And then last thing, and then I'm going to shut up, is that I included in the deck just a couple of exercises that you can use for yourself to just like a little bit of sprucing, a little bit of self-sprucing on the EQ front. It's sort of simple to practice, and that will help you understand more about your sort of responses to things and where there might be opportunities for you as you try to manage and upskill as a leader by attending to EQ. So that is that, as always. I want you to share with me, so my email address is there again if you have other thoughts or ideas. But I'm going to stop sharing and let us spend the rest of this time with you all speaking things about themes. Put them in the chat, say them out loud. I'm done talking.
So in terms of what got people excited about projects, and I think the point of that exercise was that when you're walking into a hard conversation, reconnecting to whatever gets people excited can help ease the conversation, maybe? Yes, exactly. Okay. Ding, ding, ding. So those of us that had projects that had early data that was exciting regarding the intervention, we both mentioned that, like, student quotes, student testimonials, looking at how the interventions were positively impacting students. That theme came up for both of us that were more advanced in our project. Wonderful. And then one team member who's having a hard time getting faculty buy-in mentioned that the faculty who are buying in are deeply committed to helping their students, and they're willing to do extra work because their grant didn't write in like some way to incentivize that extra work. So the theme I kept hearing coming back to was student and impacts on students. And I think leading from that place of this is the main goal is student support and success is probably a good strategy that became obvious through that conversation for us. Kyla took great notes. Did you want to add anything to that?
Thank you.
I wasn't saying my notes were great, but yeah, we did talk about sharing student quote and student feedback and how that really excited people. Some other things that were mentioned were just be enthusiastic myself and share what my successes are. Have regular meetings to share what we're doing, what we're trying to keep faculty engaged, create systems to make it easier to adapt the new strategies, and have and then also the other thing that created excitement was just seeing how other faculty change their mindset.
Brilliant. That is super, super cool. Now it's asking too much, but if anybody if you have that on a pad of paper, don't worry about it. But if you actually typed it, if you could just copy it into the chat, Kyla, or any other notes, because it would be actually very helpful to get your sort of feedback and for others to see. So if others took some notes and you want to pop them in there, no pressure. But if it's easy to do, would love to hear more about that. This thing about incentives and not having resources and inspiring people to work in the absence of resources, I just want to say we all, and you probably feel this acutely, need to tell ourselves the truth about what is possible in the absence of actually supporting people to do work. And, the idea, I heard somebody recently bemoaning, they described themselves in a pay-to-play kind of situation with faculty. And I will say that one of my feelings about that was, well, of course, one of the ways that you show somebody that you respect them is to actually honor their time and show them and compensate them for it. And so the idea that faculty are like, it's one thing to put students first, it's another thing to expect faculty to not be able to consider their own professional well-being or health. It's just, it shouldn't have to be a trade-off, right? Now, there is a whole lot that can be done to change classroom practice every single minute, every day in the absence of resources, right? But that's a different kind of conversation. But when it comes to bringing people into projects, I'm less, I don't know, judgy about pay to play than I think maybe I used to be. And I think it's partly because people are exhausted and they're overwrought. And if you want people to feel respected, then there are signals of respect. And some of those are time and money, Other things, other thoughts about keys that you've seen or things that you want to know more about from each other, about strategies. for building will. Or if you want to talk about problems, you can do that too. See, this is hard. So I think that when I'm looking for hands being raised while I'm doing this, but I also know that it's excruciating on a Friday to sit in silence, even though I'm not particularly bothered by silence in general. But I think, I was thinking, all right, I looked at the feedback from the last session. It was like, this is good. We want to talk to each other more. But you were all thinking about what it was like to be in a room together, talking to each other more. You weren't actually thinking about what it was like to be here, talking to each other more. Bye, Corona. Have a great time teaching. Good luck with your class today. All right. Any other things right now? Hey, I see a hand. Tammy, hit it.
There were a lot of themes in our room, but I mean, things like providing opportunities for reflection, creating structures for providing, gratitude and making sure that you tell people, when you're thankful for the work and the things that they've done. And giving people space. What one person said, giving people space to do the work without interference, right? But one of the things that I personally have found that has been really beneficial over the last few years that we've been doing is also giving people space to speak about their worries and fears. Because if you give them the space to be able to speak about their worries and fears, then they feel heard. And I think that's really important. But also helping them come up with their own ways of okay, so that's a worry and a fear, so what can we do about that? How can we overcome that, right? And I think that it's really, really important that we do that before we start talking about, because we come in with, we have this great idea, right? But we want to also make sure that there may be some worries and some fears that people have, and so just giving them that opportunity. So anyway, I'll stop there.
That is great. Thank you. Yeah, what you're describing is meeting people where they are. And if people are worried about things, then creating space for that out of the gate is essential for being heard about whatever you're excited about, right? Really helpful. Yep, safe space to talk about struggles and issues. Somebody in a meeting this week suggested that there should be she called it an underground chairs meeting to talk about the talk. For chairs to talk about what's really hard outside of any of the settings that are punishing for them, which are every other setting that they're in, essentially.
I love that.
Let's see here. I'm seeing some things in the chat, but others feel free to dive in.
Along those lines, Alison, we talked a bit about the importance of spending time with team members that have little to do with work, like having time at the beginning to talk about what's going on, kind of the human side, before just immediately diving into, here's all the problems, here's the things we have to solve, here's the things we have to do, like figuring out how to make that time available to connect in that way.
Yep. Great point. I hope you're seeing the chat. Yes, Colin, I bet there are a lot of us here that if we were to do a show of hands, we have grown up enough to write the email and not send it to the person. I mean, never hitting send in anger or with any emotion is really, I mean, if we had a little checklist for ourselves, and yet don't we sometimes drop the ball on that one as well? It's like, I'm hitting send. All right, any other final sort of thoughts here, things that you heard today that you thought were really good suggestions for strengthening your own change leadership capacities, your relational power, I think is how this thing was titled, right? So it's about the relationship components of the work. Yeah, hitting send by accident sometime. Yes, I will not put any person in the to line of any kind. Sometimes I'll just put it in a Google Doc for myself, That's great, Tammy. All right, are there any final, here's some stuff I learned or stuff I've tried that can help you think about or upskill, have it be easier for you in your work of leading change in your projects.
I'm going to share something that Tammy actually shared. So this isn't me, this is Tammy. This is awesome, which I just absolutely love, because I think normally we think about, you know, surrounding ourselves with our people, right? Go find our people. Well, Tammy protects her heroism by engaging with people that think differently, because it causes her to reflect on her own values and her own motivations, and helps her remember her why. I just love that.
I love that too.
I will
Tammy,
say
what do you
I
want to say?
still do also go around people that are like-minded.
Yeah, well,
It's not
yeah.
that I don't also do that. It's that I do both.
That is really powerful. Thank you. I hope that in your small group conversations that you got little tidbits of things that are useful to you, that you got a little boost for your own heroism through talking to peers today about their work, and that you know, there's something either here or in the content that Rob sent before that is helpful to you as you think about leading change from where you are and supporting other people's change leadership capacities. So thanks so much. It's been really fun to be here with you. And Rob, you're taking us home?
So yeah, thanks, Allison, for another great session. Just wanted to remind everyone the next session is not until February. So February 17th, Marco, who is on the call today, if you can wave Marco so everyone can see you, will be facilitating the next session on February 17th on utilizing and optimizing data in change leadership. And also just wanted to remind everyone that per usual, I'll post the recording on the website afterwards. The resources that I shared with you via email will also be on there. And then I'll also send another survey for this particular session in that email. So for those of you who are able, we would love for you to fill out that survey. Your feedback has meant a lot. As Allison mentioned, she even used it to adjust this session today. So again, really appreciate your honest feedback. It's been helpful. And if you all have any questions in the meantime, you know where to find us. You can email me, and you'll be hearing from us again soon. All right, everyone.
Happy Friday,
Thanks
everybody.
again. Allison, hope your weather improves.
Thanks.
Thank you.